David, Linda, and Jake Hunt were an ordinary family with ordinary dreams, until one night changed everything forever. When Mark Reynolds, a rejected boyfriend consumed by revenge, shattered their lives in a brutal attack, the quiet town would never be the same. This is the chilling story of obsession, survival, and a hunt for justice that gripped a community, and the dark secrets behind the Hunt family murders. Sarah Hunt's life had always seemed like a storybook. Growing up in a peaceful suburban town, she was surrounded by love and stability. Her parents, David and Linda Hunt, were well respected in the community, hard-working, kind, and deeply devoted to their children. Sarah was the eldest of two siblings, with a younger brother named Jake, who adored her and often looked up to her as a role model. Their family lived in a cozy two-story house, with a garden full of blooming flowers and tall oak trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was a place where neighbors greeted each other warmly, and children played safely outside until the sun went down. Sarah was known for her bright smile and gentle nature. She was popular at school, not because she sought attention, but because she was genuinely kind to everyone she met. She was smart, responsible, and had a future full of promise ahead of her. Her dreams included going to college to study psychology and one day helping others who struggled with their mental health. Life seemed full of possibility for Sarah. At the center of her life for some time was her boyfriend, Mark Reynolds. Mark was charming, confident, and seemed like the perfect match for Sarah. He came from a neighboring town and worked as a mechanic at a local garage. Friends and family noticed that when Sarah was with Mark, she looked happy and alive. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and for a while it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But beneath the surface, things began to change. Mark's charming smile would sometimes fade into a cold, distant expression. He became possessive, jealous over small things, and sometimes would disappear for hours without explanation. Sarah started to feel uneasy, but she told herself that love wasn't always easy and that people have their flaws. She wanted to believe that Mark could change or that things would get better. One afternoon, Sarah confided in a close friend that she felt trapped and scared in the relationship. Mark's moods were unpredictable, and she never knew which version of him she would face on any given day. That same week, Sarah made the difficult decision to end things with Mark. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but her safety and peace of mind had to come first. Breaking up with Mark was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done. He didn't take it well. Although he initially acted calm and understanding, his behavior soon turned dark. He stopped answering her calls and texts, but would sometimes appear unexpectedly near her school or workplace. Friends noticed that Mark's anger seemed to simmer beneath his calm exterior, and there were whispers about how dangerous he might be. Sarah's parents grew concerned. They advised her to stay vigilant and offered their support. But Sarah was determined to move on. She started spending more time with her family and friends, focusing on her studies and her future plans. She even signed up for a self-defense class, hoping to feel safer and more confident. But the shadow of Mark's obsession lingered. Unknown to Sarah and her family, Mark's feelings of rejection and humiliation twisted into something far more dangerous. He began to watch the Hunt family from a distance. At first, it was just occasional glances when Sarah left the house or drove away. But over time, Mark's surveillance became more frequent and intense. He learned their daily routines, when the family had dinner, when they left for work or school, and even the times they went to bed. He discovered weaknesses in the security system and started planning. The people around Sarah had no idea what Mark was capable of. To them, he was just a heartbroken ex-boyfriend who needed to move on. But beneath his polite mask, Mark was consumed by rage and a desperate need for control. His mind twisted every rejection into a reason for revenge. He convinced himself that, if he couldn't have Sarah, then no one would. The quiet suburban streets, once a symbol of safety and comfort, were becoming the setting for a nightmare. One neighbor later described noticing strange things. A figure lurking near the hunt. Home late at night. The sound of footsteps in the garden when no one should have been outside. The police were called once for a suspicious person report, but without solid evidence, nothing came of it. The Hunt family dismissed the concerns as paranoia, unwilling to believe that someone they knew could pose a real threat. Sarah, unaware of the growing danger, was beginning to feel hopeful again. She applied to colleges and made plans to leave town for the first time. Her parents were proud and excited for her future. Jake, her younger brother, started talking about joining a local soccer team and was happier than ever. The family dinners were filled with laughter and dreams, but the calm was fragile. Behind the scenes, Mark's obsession had reached a breaking point. He spent hours in his small apartment, drawing maps of the Hunt house, writing notes about their habits, and preparing tools for what he called his final plan. His world had narrowed to one goal: to punish Sarah by destroying everything she loved most. What started as heartbreak had grown into a deadly fixation. The sunny days and peaceful nights that the Hunt family had enjoyed were about to be ripped apart. No one could have predicted the horror that would soon unfold, changing their lives forever. As the days grew shorter and the leaves began to fall, the stage was set for a tragedy that would shock the entire community. Sarah's story, once filled with hope and love, was about to become a haunting tale of obsession, violence, and survival. The night that changed everything began quietly, like any other evening in the Hunt household. The sky was dark and heavy, with clouds, and a cool wind rustled through the trees outside. Inside the house, the family was settling into their usual routines. David was in the living room, reading a book by the soft glow of a lamp. Linda was preparing dinner in the kitchen, humming a tune to herself. Jake was upstairs, finishing his homework in his room. Sarah had gone out earlier that evening to meet a friend, but was expected back soon. No one noticed the shadow lurking just beyond the streetlight, watching the house with cold eyes. Mark Reynolds, the rejected boyfriend, had made his move. He had spent weeks planning every detail, studying the family's habits and schedules. He knew when the doors would be unlocked, when the house would be most vulnerable. Tonight was the night he would exact his revenge. Mark approached the house. Slowly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. His heart pounded, but his mind was focused, cold, and determined. He wore dark clothes and a mask that covered most of his face, hiding his identity from any passerby or surveillance camera. When he reached the back door, he produced a small set of tools he had brought with him, expertly disabling the lock within moments. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft sounds of family life. David glanced up from his book as a faint noise caught his attention, but he thought it was just the wind. Linda, unaware of the danger, continued preparing dinner, placing dishes on the counter. Jake, focused on his homework, didn't hear the door open. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Mark burst into the kitchen, brandishing a weapon he had concealed beneath his jacket. His presence shocked the family into silence, then panic. David tried to intervene, but Mark was faster and stronger than expected. A violent struggle ensued, desperate and terrifying. Linda screamed for help, her voice filled with fear, but the walls swallowed her cries. Jake, hearing the commotion downstairs, ran toward the noise, but Mark intercepted him before he could reach his parents. The young boy fought to escape, but the attacker's grip was unrelenting. Sarah's absence that night meant no one could come to their immediate aid. When the police arrived hours later, called by a worried neighbor who had heard strange noises but dared not intervene, the scene was horrifying. The house was in disarray, furniture overturned, and walls marked by the signs of a brutal fight. David, Linda, and Jake had all been killed in the attack, victims of a merciless rage fueled by revenge. The wounds told a story of violence and desperation. Sarah was missing. Her absence added a cruel layer to the mystery and horror. The police launched an immediate search, fearing that she had been taken or was in danger. The neighborhood was sealed off and officers combed every inch of the area, but there was no trace of her. The community, already grieving, was left with unanswered questions and growing fear. The news spread quickly. What had once been a peaceful neighborhood was now a crime scene, the subject of whispers and speculation. Local media descended on the hunt home, capturing images of the police tape and flashing lights that bathed the street in an eerie glow. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered, stunned by the tragedy that had unfolded so close to home. Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together what little evidence they could find. Security cameras in the area showed a dark figure entering the Hunt property around the estimated time of the attack. Witnesses recalled seeing Mark Reynolds lurking nearby in the days before, fueling suspicion that he was behind the massacre. But one question haunted everyone. Why would someone do such a terrible thing? The answer seemed to lie in the fractured relationship between Sarah and Mark. The breakup, once painful but private, had turned deadly. What had started as heartbreak escalated into something far darker. The community struggled to understand how a man they thought they knew could commit such a brutal crime. Mark's reputation as a quiet but somewhat troubled individual was now overshadowed by the horror he was suspected of causing. Friends who had once defended him were shocked and horrified, unable to reconcile the person they knew with the monster he had become. As the investigation unfolded, new details emerged that made the case even more chilling. Police discovered that Mark had prepared for the attack meticulously. He had gathered weapons, disabled alarms, and studied the family's routines for weeks. Every move he made was calculated, driven by a twisted desire for revenge. The neighbors' accounts added to the picture of a man consumed by obsession. Some had seen Mark sitting in his car outside the Hunt house late at night. Others noticed him watching from behind curtains, his eyes dark and empty. His stalking had gone unnoticed for too long, allowing him to plan without interruption. Despite the growing evidence against Mark, Sarah's disappearance remained a mystery. Theories spread. Some believed she had been kidnapped. Others feared she had been harmed during the attack. The uncertainty kept the community on edge, hoping for her safe return, but fearing the worst. Meanwhile, Sarah was trapped in a nightmare of her own. Held captive somewhere unknown, she fought to survive and make sense of what had happened to her family. The trauma she endured was unimaginable, but deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. She clung to the belief that someone would find her and bring her home. Back at the Hunt house, The police gathered every piece of evidence they could find. Forensic teams worked through the night, searching for fingerprints, DNA, and anything that could link the crime to the suspect. The brutality of the murders left investigators shaken, but they were determined to bring justice to the family. The community organized vigils and memorials to honor the victims. Flowers, candles, and photos were placed outside the Hunt home, turning the once happy neighborhood into a place of mourning. Friends shared memories of David, Linda, and Jake, remembering their kindness and the warmth they brought to everyone's lives. The Hunt family murders became a symbol of tragedy and loss, a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. What had started as a story of love and hope was now a dark chapter filled with pain and fear. Yet beneath the sorrow, a sense of determination grew. The people who loved Sarah and the Hunts vowed to find the truth and ensure that Mark would be held accountable. The search for answers continued, with every new piece of evidence bringing investigators closer to the truth. The community waited anxiously for justice and for the safe return of Sarah Hunt, a young woman caught in a nightmare she never asked for. The days after the Hunt family murders were filled with fear and uncertainty. The police had confirmed that David, Linda, and Jake were dead, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. Everyone hoped she was still alive, but as time passed, hope began to fade. The community, once tight-knit and peaceful, now felt cold and uneasy. No one knew where Sarah was, or if she would ever be found. The police launched a massive search operation to find her. Officers combed through nearby forests, checked abandoned buildings, and canvassed the neighborhood again and again. Volunteers from the community joined the search parties, walking through fields, calling Sarah's name, and hoping for any sign of her. Days turned into nights, and the search grew more desperate. The media covered the story intensely, broadcasting updates around the clock. Sarah's face was shown everywhere, on television, newspapers, and social media. People across the country felt connected to her story and hoped for her safe return. Still, no clear leads emerged, and the mystery deepened. One of the most frustrating parts of the investigation was the lack of clues. The Hunt house had been thoroughly searched, but no trace of Sarah was found inside. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Theories began to circulate. Some believed she had been taken by Mark, the ex-boyfriend suspected of killing her family. Others wondered if she had managed to escape and was hiding somewhere, afraid to come forward. The police interviewed neighbors and anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Some reported strange noises on the night of the murders, whispers, footsteps, or doors opening and closing. Others mentioned seeing a dark car driving slowly past the Hunt home in the days leading up to the attack. But none of these accounts led to concrete evidence or helped find Sarah. Investigators also reviewed phone records, text messages, and social media activity, hoping to find clues about Sarah's whereabouts or Mark's plans. They discovered that Mark's phone had been inactive since the night of the murders, adding to the suspicion that he had gone into hiding or was planning his next move. Sarah's phone was missing, leaving a gap in the timeline that made it difficult to trace. Her steps, the community grew restless and anxious. Friends and family organized candlelight vigils, praying for Sarah's safety. Flyers with her photo were posted all over town, and social media campaigns urged people to share any information. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. Meanwhile, inside a dark, cold basement far from home, Sarah clung to life. She had been taken by Mark and hidden away in a place he believed no one would ever find. The room was small and bare, with only a single window too high to reach and no way to escape. Days blended into nights as she tried to keep calm and think of a way out. Sarah's mind raced with fear and confusion. She struggled to understand why Mark had spared her life when he had killed her family. She knew she had to stay strong if she wanted to survive and find a way back to safety. Each moment was a battle against despair. During her captivity, Sarah learned more about Mark's twisted mind. She saw evidence of his obsession, photos of her family, notes about their daily routines, and even a map marking the Hunt house and the surrounding area. It was clear that his hatred was not just about losing her, but about controlling her and punishing her in the most cruel way possible. Sarah tried to stay hopeful by imagining her family and friends outside, searching for her. She held on to memories of happier times, drawing strength from the thought that one day she would be free again. But fear was never far away, and the silence of her prison was crushing. Back in town, the police refused to give up. They continued to search every lead and followed tips from the public. One day, a breakthrough came when a hiker found a discarded phone near an old warehouse on the edge of town. The phone was later identified as Sarah's, a discovery that both alarmed and encouraged investigators. The warehouse was a grim, abandoned building that had not been used for years. Police searched it carefully, moving through dusty rooms and dark corridors. Finally, in a hidden basement beneath the building, they found Sarah, alive, but shaken and weak. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors treated her for dehydration and injuries sustained during her captivity. Her rescue brought a wave of relief and joy to the community. The news spread quickly, and people gathered outside the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Sarah's survival was a miracle after such a horrific ordeal. As Sarah recovered, she began to piece together the terrifying experience she had endured. Though she could not speak of everything immediately, her fragmented memories provided crucial information for the investigation. She described the basement, where she was held, and the man who had kept her captive. Her story confirmed the worst suspicions. Mark was responsible for the murders and the kidnapping. But Sarah's survival also raised new questions. Why had Mark spared her life when he had killed the rest of her family? What was his plan for her? The answers were as disturbing as the crime itself. Detectives worked closely with Sarah, building a timeline and understanding Mark's motives. They discovered that Mark had carefully planned not only the attack, but also the kidnapping, intending to keep Sarah as a prisoner. His obsession had driven him to commit unthinkable acts, but when faced with the reality of his actions, his control began to slip. Mark's plans were interrupted when the police found Sarah, but investigators knew he was still out there, dangerous and unpredictable. The search for him became a priority, and law enforcement agencies across the region were alerted. Sarah's bravery and resilience inspired many. Despite the trauma she endured, she showed incredible strength in facing her nightmare and helping police bring the truth to light. Her survival became a symbol of hope amid tragedy. The community slowly began to heal, but the scars of that night remained. The Hunt family murders left a deep wound, reminding everyone of the fragility of safety and the dark power of obsession. But through the pain, people came together, supporting one another and honoring the memory of David, Linda, and Jake. Sarah's rescue marked the beginning of a new chapter, one of justice and recovery. The hunt for Mark continued, and the determination to see him held accountable grew stronger each day. Though the road ahead would be difficult, those who loved Sarah believed that light could still shine through the darkness. After Sarah's rescue, the focus of the entire investigation shifted dramatically. For weeks, police had been desperately searching not only for her but also for Mark Reynolds, the man who had shattered the Hunt family's lives. Now, with Sarah safe and able to share details of her captivity, law enforcement had the crucial information they needed to hunt him down. Mark had vanished into the shadows, but the world around him was closing in. His carefully constructed life was unraveling fast. The man who had once appeared as a quiet mechanic was revealed to be a calculating and dangerous criminal. Authorities believed he was still armed and unstable, making the search urgent and perilous. Using Sarah's detailed description of the basement where she had been held, the police mapped out potential locations Mark might be hiding. He knew the area well and had family and acquaintances in neighboring towns. Detectives coordinated with regional law enforcement and set up checkpoints along major roads, hoping to catch him if he tried to flee the region. Mark's movements were difficult to track. He was careful to avoid electronic devices, rarely using a phone or the internet. He changed vehicles frequently and moved mostly by foot or public transportation. The man who had once seemed confident and in control was now a desperate fugitive, haunted by the crimes he had committed. Meanwhile, the community remained on edge. Though relieved that Sarah was safe, the knowledge that Mark was still at large kept fear alive. Schools increased security measures, and neighborhoods organized watch groups. The sense of safety that had once defined the town was replaced with suspicion and caution. Sarah herself faced a long road to recovery. Physically and emotionally exhausted, she spent weeks in therapy and counseling. The trauma of losing her family and being held captive was deep, and the memories were painful. But Sarah showed remarkable courage, determined not to let fear define her life. She worked closely with law enforcement, attending meetings and reviewing evidence to help identify every detail she could remember. Her insight was critical in understanding Mark's mindset and the extent of his plans. She described how his obsession with control had driven him to plan the attack and kidnapping with terrifying precision. Investigators uncovered more disturbing facts. Mark's home was searched, revealing journals filled with disturbing thoughts, sketches of the Hunt house, and detailed notes about Sarah and her family. His writing showed a mind consumed by rage and rejection, unable to accept the breakup and driven by a desire for vengeance. The police also found weapons and tools that Mark had prepared for the attack. It became clear that he had intended not only to punish Sarah, but also to make a terrifying statement. His actions were calculated to cause maximum pain and fear, leaving the community shaken. As the manhunt continued, authorities issued a public warning, urging residents to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity. Local news outlets provided updates and safety tips, keeping the public informed, but also cautious. The hunt for Mark was one of the largest manhunts the region had seen in years. Amid this intense atmosphere, detectives began piecing together Mark's last known movements. They learned that shortly after the attack, he had fled to a remote cabin owned by a distant relative. The location was difficult to access, hidden deep in the woods, making it an ideal hideout. Police moved quickly to surround the cabin, preparing for a possible confrontation. Tactical teams and negotiators were called in, ready to handle whatever might happen. The tense standoff that followed lasted hours, with officers attempting to communicate with Mark and convince him to surrender peacefully. Inside the cabin, Mark was alone, isolated, and desperate. The walls were bare except for some maps and notes, scattered across a small table. He was exhausted but still defiant, unwilling to give up despite the odds. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger, caught between regret and rage. Finally, after a long night of negotiation and careful planning, Mark surrendered. He was taken into custody without violence, ending the manhunt that had gripped the region. His arrest brought relief, but also raised questions about what had driven him to such darkness. In the weeks that followed, Mark faced trial for the murders of David, Linda, and Jake Hunt, as well as the kidnapping and abuse of Sarah. The courtroom was packed with community members, reporters, and family friends. The trial uncovered the full extent of his obsession and the horrors he had inflicted on the Hunt family. Sarah's testimony was powerful and emotional. She described the events leading up to the attack, her captivity, and the fear she had endured. Her courage in facing Mark in court inspired many, shining a light on the strength it takes to survive and seek justice. The prosecution presented evidence of Mark's meticulous planning and violent actions, painting a clear picture of a man driven by obsession and cruelty. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming facts, and after several days of testimony, the jury found Mark guilty on all charges. The sentencing was severe. Mark received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm another person again. The judge called the crimes horrific acts of vengeance and praised Sarah's bravery in bringing the truth to light. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the community, but the healing process was far from over. The Hunt family murders left a lasting impact on everyone involved, reminding them of the fragility of safety and the destructive power of obsession. Sarah continued her recovery with the support of family, friends, and professionals. She found comfort in helping others, speaking out about the dangers of abusive relationships and the importance of mental health support. Her story became a message of hope and resilience. The community also worked to rebuild. Neighborhood Watch. Programs were strengthened, and support services for victims of violence were expanded. The tragedy inspired efforts to raise awareness about stalking, domestic violence, and the signs of dangerous behavior. Through the pain and loss, a new sense of strength emerged. The Hunt family's memory lived on in the hearts of those who loved them. And Sarah's courage reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, survival and justice are possible. The story of the Hunt family murders became a cautionary tale, a reminder to recognize the warning signs of obsession and to never underestimate the importance of safety and support. It showed the devastating consequences when love turns to hate, and how one person's pain can ripple through an entire community. In the end, justice was served, but the scars remained. The peaceful town that had once been full of laughter and light had changed forever. Yet amid the shadows, hope still glimmered. Sarah's survival was a testament to human strength and the will to overcome even the most terrible darkness. The trial of Mark Reynolds was one of the most intense and emotional events the town had ever witnessed. People followed every detail with bated breath, wanting to understand how someone they had once seen as an ordinary man could commit such terrible crimes. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence as the evidence was presented, each piece painting a clearer picture of the horror endured by the Hunt family. Sarah's testimony was the heart of the trial. Though her voice sometimes shook, she spoke clearly about the nightmare she survived. She described how Mark's obsession had started as something small, but grew into a dangerous and violent force. Her words revealed the cold calculation behind the murders and kidnapping, the fear she felt while imprisoned, and the strength she found to fight back and survive. Throughout the trial, the prosecution laid out the timeline of Mark's actions. They showed the journal entries where he wrote about his plan for revenge, the weapons he collected, and the detailed maps he drew of the hunt home. These pages revealed a mind consumed by anger and rejection, unable to let go of a past relationship, and instead, choosing to destroy everything he once cared about. The defense tried to argue that Mark was mentally ill, unable to control his actions. They brought in psychologists who suggested that his obsession was a symptom of deeper psychological issues. But the jury was not convinced that mental illness excused the brutality of his crimes. They saw a man who had made clear choices that led to the deaths of 3 innocent people and the torture of another. As the trial neared its end, Sarah's family and friends gathered outside the courthouse. Their support gave her strength, reminding her that she was not alone. The community, still mourning the loss of David, Linda, and Jake, found some comfort in seeing justice move forward. But the pain of the murders remained a heavy weight on everyone's hearts. When the jury returned with the verdict, the courtroom was tense. The judge read the decision aloud, guilty on all counts. Mark Reynolds was found responsible for the Eid murders and kidnapping. The verdict brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice was served. Sorrow for the lives lost and forever changed. Mark was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge spoke firmly about the need to protect the community from someone capable of such cruelty. The sentence was a statement that the law would not tolerate acts of vengeance and violence. After the trial, Sarah began to rebuild her life. The process was slow and difficult, but she was determined to heal. She worked with therapists who helped her process the trauma and regain a sense of safety. Friends and neighbors offered their support, showing her that kindness and love could still exist even after such darkness. Sarah also chose to share her story publicly, hoping to raise awareness about the dangers of obsessive relationships and the importance of seeking help. She spoke at schools and community centers, encouraging others to recognize warning signs and to speak out before situations become dangerous. Her courage inspired many and helped others feel less alone. The hunt. Family murders had sparked a community-wide effort to improve safety and support for victims of violence. Local leaders worked to create better resources for people facing stalking or abuse. Neighborhood watch programs were strengthened, and training sessions on how to respond to threats were organized. Memorials for David, Linda, and Jake remained in the town, places where people could remember the kindness and warmth those 3 had shared. Their memories became a reminder to cherish loved ones and to stand against violence in all its forms. Though the pain of loss never fully disappeared, Sarah's story became one of hope and resilience. She showed that even after the darkest nights, the human spirit could find a way to shine again. Her survival was a powerful testament to courage in the face of unimaginable fear. The community, forever changed by the Hunt family murders, learned to protect one another in new ways. The tragedy had taught them hard lessons, but also brought them closer together. People became more aware, more compassionate, and more determined to prevent such horrors from happening again. Mark Reynolds' name faded from headlines, but the impact of his actions remained. The scars he left behind served as a warning that obsession and hatred can destroy lives if not stopped. His imprisonment ensured he would never harm anyone again, but the story of the Hunt family remained a painful chapter in the town's history. Years later, Sarah found peace in small moments, walks through the park, time with friends, and quiet evenings at home. She kept the memory of her family alive by living fully, honoring their love and the life they had shared. Her strength became a beacon for others who faced their own struggles. The Hunt family murders, while tragic and devastating, became a story about survival and justice. It showed how darkness can touch even the most ordinary lives, but also how courage, community, and the law can bring light back again.